Awesome. Let me grab my coffee, get settled. It's going to be a good day. Well, good morning. Good morning. Hope you're doing well this morning. My name is Mike, and I am one of the leaders here at C3KW. And if this is your first time with us here today, we are pumped that you're in the room. Especially if this is your first time in church in a while, maybe your first time in church ever. We're especially pumped for you because you're part of the reason why we do church the way that we do it, in fact, to help engage people just like you with the message and the hope of God's love and mercy and grace and beauty, and to discover what Jesus called life and life to the very full that happens through his life, death, and resurrection for our sin and redemption in him. And so we're just pumped that you can be here hearing about that. And we're especially excited today, if this is your first time, because you picked a good week to show up for the first time. You know what I'm saying? Because today's going to be quite a roller coaster ride of awkward, of joy, of weird desire, of maybe even a little bit of pain and weirdness. It's going to be a weird day. You picked a good one. You might be asking yourself, why is that so? Well, there's always two topics in church that always make people weird: money and sex. Right? And so we're going to talk about marriage and sex today. It's going to be a good day. Because we have been in a series we're calling Selfless, all about essentially how selfishness is the enemy of a good covenant, and to be selfless is actually to be the kind of husband and wife that you need to be. And so today we come to the topic that everyone wants to talk about, but no one wants to use words apparently: sex. Right? So I've said it a lot already. If there's any young ears in the room, I'm looking around just to make sure we got a good crowd here. Good. Because I'll say some words today that maybe if you have not talked to your children about, I don't want to be the first one. I'm just saying, I do not want to be the first one to do that. So if you got a Bible, we are going to be in Song of Song, chapter 7. Song of Song, chapter 7. Now, if you've been here with us for the last couple of weeks, then you would know that I've described this book as one of those books that some commentators say, that young men especially aren't supposed to read before they're married. But we're going to jump 2 feet in today. We are going to read some of the most interesting verses of the whole Bible. Some people don't realize that in the Bible there is an erotic love poem known as the Song of Songs. And we're reading a good chapter of that today. Before I do that, if you're turning there, I do want to read Genesis chapter 2, verse 24 again, just to set up what marriage is for us, just to give us the context. This is the image of the first marriage, the first wedding that God does after he makes Adam and Eve. And he says this to them, right? Therefore, a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And Jesus in Mark chapter 10 adds, and so there are no longer two, but one. There's a deep union here. And verse 25 says, and the man and his wife, after God made them and introduced them to each other, were both naked and unashamed. That's the state of that moment. Nakedness and delight. And with that context, Song of Song, chapter 7, starting in verse 1. And this, by the way, is the man's response after his spouse danced for him. Yes. Yes. How beautiful are your feet in sandals, O noble daughter. Gentlemen, notice her footwear. Why not? Right? If she's about shoes, just tell her, hey, your feet look great in that. No, notice her sandals. I'm just saying, it's going to be good. Your rounded thighs are like jewels, the work of a master's hand. I like your legs, girl. He wrote it. Right? I'm just going, right? Your navel is a rounded bowl that never lacks mixed wine, and your belly is a heap of wheat. I'm just saying, gentlemen. This is one of those ones you don't want to plagiarize. Like, you got to, contextualize a little bit. And the reason is because commentators are weird here. He's not talking about her belly. He's talking about her waist. He's saying, I like your shape. You know what I'm saying? Right? But I want to point this out because it's going to come out a little bit later, and I know this is going to be awkward for everybody in the room. But did you notice how he's going from like the feet upwards, right? Starts with feet, and then he goes legs. And apparently he skips the waist, goes to the navel, then goes back down the waist. Unless there's another part of a woman that is between the thigh and the waist that he wishes to drink from. I'm just going to let you fill in the gap there. And if you think I'm kidding, I wrote a paper in college all on this chapter. Let's continue. Your breasts are like two fawns, twins of a gazelle. Playful. I'm not kidding. I'm trying to just interpret the scriptures for you. All right? Your neck is like an ivory tower. Your eyes are the pools in Heshbon by the gate of Bath Rabbim. Your nose is like a tower of Lebanon. That one I've never really appreciated. He's like, girl, you got a big nose. But apparently he likes that, right? It's fine, right? It's good, right? Which looks towards Damascus. Your head crowns you like Carmel, and your flowing locks are like purple. A king is held captive in its tresses. I like your hair. I like your hair. Right? How beautiful and pleasant you are, O loved one, with all of your delights. This is one of my favorite passages of Scripture right here, right? And your stature is like a palm tree, and your breasts are like its clusters. I say, I will climb that tree and take hold of its fruit. That's in there. I'm not making that up, right? Oh, may your breasts with the clusters of a vine, and the scent of your breath like apples, and your mouth like the best of wine. And she responds, it goes down smoothly for my beloved, gliding over lips and teeth. His love is like wine. That one just is what it is. I am my beloved, and his desire is for me. I didn't add this in there, so Sam, this is not there. But verse 11, I just want to add in. So this is what she says back to him. Come, my beloved, let's go out to the fields. Let's pray. God, thank you so much for today. We do pray for wisdom and guidance in this wonderful conversation we're about to have. I pray that nothing out of my lips, God, comes that's not from your heart and your desire for our church, but I pray that we'll have an honest and open conversation about something that we all do think about, care about, maybe even struggle with. And so we pray this in your name, Jesus. Amen. Amen. So, I don't know about you. There's obviously no real good way to jump into this conversation other than just to jump right in, literally. And so I want to set some things up, because if you were a church-going person in your teenagers, right, you probably went to youth group, maybe, right? Or maybe you weren't even a Christian, but it was like the only thing that was available on a Friday night in your town to go hang out with some coverall-wearing Christians, right? So maybe that was your experience, right? And usually if you went to youth group growing up, you had one of three kind of, conversations around this idea of sexuality, right? Depending on, your youth pastor and how comfortable they were with sexuality, right? And so the one is usually this, right? That sex is this dirty, gross, bodily thing, so save it for marriage, right? Which is kind of confusing. Right? I thought it was bad, but we're saying it's going to be great then. It doesn't really work out. So then what some pastors did was the opposite. They're like, it's amazing, and it's wonderful, and it's beautiful, but don't want it, you lusty little teenager, right? And that's another confusing message. It's like, I thought it was good. Or maybe you're one of those people who had the youth pastor who never talked about it ever, so you think when I say the word sex, I'm speaking Hebrew right now, right? You're like, what is that word? I don't know what that is, right? How do babies form? You've never had that conversation, right? Or maybe you never went to any of that, and you went to public high school, and what you heard was that sex is just this biological appetite. Every human being needs to do it. And so if, wink, wink, if you're going to do it, at least do it safely, which means what? Go steal a condom from your brother, right, and know how to put it on, basically, right? And so save it for the one you love, because for some reason in our modern, unnuanced world, right, eroticism and love mean the same thing. That apparently you cannot fully love somebody without having to sleep with them, which is nuts, by the way, right? We do not believe that. You can soulfully, beautifully, totally love another human being and not need to see them naked, right? To restrict sexuality is not to restrict love, right? Love must be more nuanced than that. Sexuality is an expression of it, and we're going to get there, but it's not the whole thing, right? Or maybe you've grown up past there, and you've bought into kind of the modern culture that says that sexuality is best expressed when you're single, right? That when you get married, right, it all sort of goes downhill. It's no more fun. It's boring, and it's monotonous, and it never happens anymore. It's a ball and chain, and blah, blah, blah. You know what's funny about that? No study backs that story up. Did you know that? Right? There was this, what some call the groundbreaking study called The Case for Marriage, put on by two women, actually, Judith Waite and Maddie Gallagher. And they concluded in this study that married people have more frequent sex, better sex, women have more orgasms, and both report better overall satisfaction when you're married. In fact, one of the concluding statements was this: promoting marriage will make for a lot more happy men and women. For Sex in America reports that married sex beats all else. Which, Christians, that should not shock us. That's kind of our thing, right? Because here's a little secret. I know this might shock you if you have the kind of like a puritanical view of Christianity in the church, but you know what? That sex was God's idea. He kind of made the whole thing. He formed all the parts, right? An orgasm was God's creative invention. He blessed them when they were naked, said, hey, go at it. Like, do you think Adam was tilling the garden all day long? No, right? He had to do other things with his wife, right? This is all happening before the fall. This is a good thing of God. And maybe if it's his idea and his invention, he may have some, standards around it. Maybe there's a better way of operating under the guidance of what God actually desires. And so what we begin to see is that all these kind of youth group stories and cultural stories, right, they're all just confusing bad theology that doesn't help anybody. And actually, I've seen it happen more often than not, actually ruin or at least make more difficult sexuality within marriage. And so what I want to do today to get to the point of actually answering some very practical questions on sex in marriage is I want to start with the most sexiest topic we can, philosophy. And start from the ground up, right? Because here's the thing, right? Unless we are building a good theology around this, it's going to just be awkward and not really go anywhere, because every single one of us in this room has what we call a worldview, has a filter, a story of the world that tells us about humans, about creation, about sexuality, what it's used for, what it's not used for. And the problem is they're competing, especially in the modern world, between kind of a secular humanist idea and the Christian kind of purposeful idea of sexuality. And so if these things are coming into a marriage, not to mention the fact that we bring our own experiences, woundedness, emotions, maybe some fears and shames that come, it just creates for this complexity that we need to deal with. And so I want to start from the ground up, build a theology of sex for us today, and then deal with some of the questions that we often run into when it comes to marriage. And so from that, what we do is we start in Genesis. We start in Genesis, right? Because here's what I want you to see, is I could legitimately just get up here and say, God made sex, have it in marriage. If you're dating, stop it and go home and we could be done. Because it'd all be true, but it wouldn't be helpful. And I want to help us to understand the richness of this. And so back in Genesis, if you were here in week 1, if you remember this, we said that one of the 4 kind of sacred institutions or gifts of God before the fall happened, before we rebelled against God and selfishness creeped in and sin broke down what God called good, one of those things was actually sexuality. That was a gift of God given in marriage for the promotion of something in what Jesus and God calls the one flesh union. That would be unity. That's what it's for, ultimately, as we're going to see. And so, contra culture and things like that, we reject the idea, right, that sexuality is just this basic biological evolutionary need to perpetuate the gene pool, so men just have to have as many partners as possible. Monogamy is never going to work. No, right? We say no to that, right? Yes, as we'll see in a minute, sex is procreative. Of course it is, right? But it's not only that. It's deeper than that. It's bigger than that. And again, against culture, right, we don't believe that sex is simply just an activity of pleasure, right? That my body is a transactional commodity, that I will trade it for an experience or for intimacy. No. We believe, as we'll see, sex is for pleasure, but not only for that. Right? Or do we believe that the sexuality is for things like identity or fulfillment or exploration or for fantasy, or that it's just some other human activity on par with sports like some philosophers believe? Right? That it's just this detached reality. This is you can just engage together and not feel anything. Hear me. If you've ever actually had sex, you know it's not a detached thing. Right? And at the moment, sexuality becomes something that is numbed and detached, something we would argue is broken there. You should feel something. It's kind of the point, right? And so we would reject all those things, as well as, and maybe most importantly for some of us in this room today, it is not an activity of power. That sexuality was never meant to be a power thing, a control thing, a dominance thing, right? So we look at those perspectives and we say to all of them, no. No. Because some are just wrong and others are just incomplete. There's more to the story. And so when we look into the book of Genesis and we see what God has done, he makes them naked, unashamed, says to them, be fruitful and multiply and get busy, right? And so from that place, we can deduce at least 3 major purposes for sexuality, okay? And all of them, generally speaking, are not about you. Sexuality in its purest form is about servanthood, not about self-fulfillment. So the first one, and this is from lowest to highest of priority, the lowest priority of sexuality is pleasure, right? Like, It feels good. Well, at least ideally, right? Like, it's supposed to be a good space to be in, right? Like, I don't know if you've picked it up in what we were reading today. This man is full of hormones and desire and delight, flirtatiousness. He wants to just get all up in her business. That's a good thing. And there's not one mention of children happening. It's a purely pleasure-based poem, right? Which is fine for us. Because that's part of it. Because here's the thing. God could have made sex boring. He could have made it robotic. Just, I'm not even going to describe that moment. I had this weird thing going on in my head. No. He could have made it, but he didn't. He made it fun, right? He made it good. He made it enjoyable and pleasurable together. He made it like that. And so we say, yes, part of the sexual encounter is actually to feel good and to make my partner feel good, to serve their need and to want them to feel something. It's about pleasure, 100%. The issue, it's not only about that. It's deeper than that, right? And this is where culture gets it wrong, because typically culture flips the priorities and puts pleasure at the top, right? And you can prove it. Just go walk through a grocery store, checkout, right? And you'll discover 172 ways to blow his mind, right? It's like, cool down, Cosmo, right? There's bigger things here. But that's all what we're about. Techniques and this. No one's ever writing a whole article. Here's 144 ways to develop intimacy. Because that doesn't sell, apparently. Or because we have a different narrative on sexuality. Right? So for us, yes, pleasure is a part of it. It should feel good. It does feel good when done right. It's a good thing, right? But it's not the only thing. Which leads me into number 2, which is procreation. Right? I hope everyone in this room has had that talk. The birds and the bees, right? Because sex makes babies. Right? Like one of the first commandments was be fruitful and multiply, right? That was one of the things before the fall God made humans to do, make babies. And the mechanism for making babies is gloriously a pleasure-filled activity called sex, right? Which means husbands and wives want to try it, right? And it's the thing, right? So it makes babies. But here's the thing that I want to say, as I've said, it's not only about that, which is why we can have a whole erotic love poem all about, making babies. Right? And I understand all about not making actual, you know what I mean? Anyways, point being is I know in culture, okay, throughout history, and maybe this is where you've come from the church background, there has been a weird relationship with the church and sexuality around the idea of especially still even in the Catholic Church, that sex is only for babies, that it's this kind of bodily thing and you're not supposed to have it unless you want to make a baby out of it, right? Which actually comes not from Christianity, but from what's called Platonic dualism, right? That the body is bad, the spirit is good, the body is the prison cell of the soul, and we got to escape it. That's not Christianity, right? God made the world, made it good, right? Jesus bodily rose from the dead to redeem bodily creation, right? It's all good, right? And so it's not that it's only about procreation because it's just all about this bodily thing. No, it's about pleasure, but it is about making babies. And so here's the thing. To enter into a sexual encounter and not consider the power of this moment is to reduce it to this place of selfishness. I know this is totally anti-culture, right? That says, it's all about you. But to go into a sexual moment and not at least consider for a second the power of this moment, the power of this procreative activity, right, is to be selfish. Now, that doesn't mean everything you do to each other is procreative in nature. I don't know if you remember what we just read about where he wants to explore his wife's body, but babies weren't coming from that, right? The point being is we just got to have the context that this thing is a procreative thing, right? So it's pleasure, it's procreative, and most importantly today, and this is where we're going to spend the rest of our time and dig out together, it is about unity. It is about unity. And so what we have to see is that sexuality was given as the mechanism to enflesh in life what's happening spiritually. It is to actually demonstrate physically the spiritual reality of a one-flesh union. Because when you have sex, right, you're kind of enacting a one-fleshness, right? You can figure that out yourself. But the point being, right, is that God gave sexuality to consummate and then perpetuate the fact we are one. The way you could say it is like this, is that sexuality in its purest form is sacredly unifying. That's its job. It has a purpose. It's not just pleasure, it's purpose-filled, that we are to be reminding each other that this union, this bond, is actually what we're about. That we are one, I'm yours, you are mine, we are together. When I engage in sex with my wife, I want you to hear this. I want to make sure that this is very clear. What I am engaging in is a ritual of our relationship. Sex is symbolic. It's not just activity, it's a symbol that says this: we are one. It's covenant making, covenant keeping, and covenant renewing. Every time a married person, right, when you guys come together, husband and wife have sex, what you're saying is that we are renewing our covenant of oneness. That's its goal. That's the sacredness of this thing. It's not just to meet your needs. It's not just to make babies. It's to look at each other and say, we are one together. And we're going to be one forever. And we're going to keep reminding each other of this over and over and hopefully a lot, right? That it's sacredly unifying, that when we engage in it, we are engaging in covenant making. So what we have, it's a ritual, it's a symbol of our unity, it's covenant making, it's covenant keeping, it's supposed to be the weaving of bodies, the intermingling of souls, the coming together of persons, right? Naked bodies, naked persons together. This is what marriage ultimately becomes for us. And sex is the avenue by which that's done. That the best sex is always done in a context of faithfulness. That's where it protects it. And I want you to hear this very clearly from my lips today. Sexuality in God's world has nothing to do with your identity, has nothing to do with ultimately your fulfillment. It's actually about serving my spouse and creating unity. Now, that doesn't mean it's not complex and not beautiful and not vulnerable and not intimate, but we have to not let it become what it's not. It's not about you, right? That sexuality has been weaponized in our modern world to try to divide people in a weird way when it doesn't need to do that, right? Because it's meant to be about husband and wife telling each other we are one. It has purpose. It has purpose. And what that means for us is simply this, that sex is never meant to be transactional, always covenantal, always for each other, other-centered, selfless at its best expression. And for the Christian, it is the physical demonstration of a spiritual reality of a one flesh forming and fusing forever, which is why Christians have such a, what culture would call, a restrictive view of sexuality, right? We call it sacred. Not restricted, sacred, because we know what it is. It's covenant making. It's covenanting myself to you. It's not just physical, it is spiritual, it is emotional, and did you know it's even chemical, right? Like stuff that goes off in your brain during sex actually chemically bonds you to them. That's the genius of Jesus, right? On every level of the person, we are actually bonding now, right? That's why you need to do it often, husbands and wives, so he actually keeps that stuff going. And so it's not that God hates pleasure or God wants to control people. He actually wants us to have the best, beautiful, complex, and emotionally wild experience in the context of a marriage, because that's what it was made for. That's its purpose, to covenant, to take together. In fact, one author wrote this, that the problem with all the topless bars and pornographic literature of our day is not that it emphasizes sexuality too much, but that it does not do it enough. That we as Christians don't have a low view of sex at all. A very high one. A very sacred one. That I want you to have great sex with your spouse, because I know what it does for you. How it bonds you and unifies you. That I want you to explore all that together. And so because we honor sex, we say no to a lot of options. That's the sexual ethic within marriage, within the Christianity, is because we have such a high view of the sacred gift of God given to unify a husband and wife in their covenant, we say no to a lot of expression, right? Willingly, but also because we believe it's the best way that God operates, the best way that God meant it to operate. And so that's why if you're not married, we say you don't have it, right? Because very simply, you can't be one with them and them and them and them, and it doesn't just mathematically work out, right? Not to mention that Jesus says, let what God has joined, do not let men separate. Why? Because the separation of those people is not just separating the bodies, but it's actually tearing apart souls. There is a damage there. And so I know hookup culture today says it's not, there's no problem with it. Just experience everything you can. And yeah, sure, technology allows you to miss all the STIs that can come through it. But how many of you know, and this can be super lame, but just go with me, right? You might not miss the STI, but you will always contract an STW. Sexually transmitted wounding. It's going to happen. Some of you feel it right now that we're talking about it. Right? The images still are in your head of past people. Some of you have been abused. It wasn't your choice, but it happened. Sexuality hits us deep. The wounds go far. The guilt can be high. The shame in sexuality, the devil knows how to have a heyday with that one. So it's because we actually love you. Because God actually loves you, single person. He's trying to protect you from some wounds that you don't need to have. So not only do we have a sacred view of sexuality, but a deeply personal protection view of sexuality. So I don't care if you're conservative or liberal, both cases, guess what? Our view of sex is trying to meet all the needs that we have. So with that said, with the rest of my time, I'm going to now shift from philosophy to pre-marriage counseling. Or coaching. I can't say counseling. Oops. Whatever. Because I want to answer. This is going to be fun. Are you guys ready? If it hasn't been already awkward at this point, it's about to be. I'm going to answer of the four biggest questions I get asked as a pastor when it comes to pre-marriage and sex. Given the context that sex for us in God's world, the best sex is blessed sex is best sex when it's married sex. So we're going to have good sex in marriage. Okay? 4 questions. What can we do together? How often should we be doing that stuff together? What if I'm not in the mood? You laugh, but that's a real question. And then what happens when my spouse is watching porn? 4 questions, right? I knew today wouldn't be, a very jovial experience, awkward and weird and uncomfortable. So I'm going to try to make some jokes for the rest of the time. So, if they're a little pushy, if they're a little edgy, just laugh anyway. I'm trying to lighten the mood, people. All right. What can we do together? Is there any limitations in a married relationship on what you can and cannot do sexually together? Right? This is a question I get asked all the time. I'm not going to, by the way, specifically deal with certain kinds of expressions, though those happen often in the marriage prep, conversations. But I want to answer the question is are there lines and any limits? And so here is the clearest line that there is. If sex is sacredly unifying, husband and wife, then you cannot add anyone else in. That's the line, right? The biggest line, right? Adultery, no, right? No. Threesome, no. Open relationship, no. Swinging, no. Sharing spouses, no. Polyamorous, no. No. Because we believe in the unifying power of sex between two people. Right? So obviously if it breaks any of the biblical rules around sexuality, just to say it, because I know people weird, right? Like animals, no, that's a rule, right? You can't do that, right? Just saying. Like if that's a thing for you, I know a good counselor. Anyways, that's a whole other conversation, right? And so those are the big no's. But within marriage, there's also here's the thing. I don't want to tell you what you can and cannot do. I want to train you how to think like a married Christian, right? And so there's 4 things to consider always when it comes to sexuality. Consent, safety, enslavement, and unity. Okay, 4 things, right? If you're taking notes, those are 4 big ones. If you're not taking notes, you're offending me. First one is consent. Obviously, you both should want to do the thing you're talking about, right? Like you should want together to be doing this. You should be comfortable with it. And if there's something that your spouse does not want to do, the answer is no. It's not being emotionally sucky and manipulative, right? It's no. If it induces shame or humiliation, the answer is no, right? Not because Well, mainly because it's not honoring to the person. So they feel a little bit of shame in trying that out or doing that thing. Like, the answer is, I don't want to make you feel shame or humiliated. I want to honor your personhood, right? I want to pump that up. And so if it's shame-inducing, if someone doesn't want to do it, because here's the thing that we often forget, I think, in the church for some weird reason, is this. Just because they're your spouse doesn't mean that somehow it's impossible to abuse them. If they don't want to do it, and you make it happen, you've just abused your spouse. If you've emotionally manipulated them into doing something they don't want to do, you've just abused your spouse. And that's evil. Right? Like that still can happen. And so maybe there's some people in the room today, after church, you need to go to your spouse and repent for the abuse you put them through. Let's let that one sit. It's possible. Consent is a big one. We both want to do this. Number 2 is this, safety, right? Meaning this, it's done in a pretty safe way that's not going to cause bodily harm, strenuous circumstances, or just done in some weird way that's going to be like dirty, right? It's like, I'm going to go, have sex in this weird bathroom that no one's ever cleaned in 4 hours. 4 hours, like 4 days. 4 hours probably be clean, right? Going to have germ problems. The point being, it's got to be a safe place. It's not going to just purposely try to put you at harm, okay? Safety. It's about promoting good things, okay? So do it safely, right? And if it's going to hurt someone, if your spouse is like, that actually hurts, stop, right? Stop. Now, never mind. Stop. Anyways, so consent and safety. The number 3 one, which is going to be real awkward for everyone in the room, but we got to talk about, is enslavement. Right? The Bible does make a case in many different parts of the scriptures that we are to be enslaved to nothing. The modern language for that would be addiction, right? That we're not addicted, body, mind, and soul to anything. So in the world of sexuality, what that means is this, okay? Your weird fetishes and kinks are not neutral. If you have to have sex in certain ways and certain things with certain times, like that's enslavement. It's not honoring the marriage. It's all about you, actually. It's selfish. It's fulfilling of me. So all your little fantasies and all your little things, right? If you are together and your wife or your husband wants to do it, then you explore it. But if it's dehumanizing, if it's pain-inducing, if it's demoralizing, if it's shame-inducing, the answer is no. Not because we're against pleasure, but because we're about personhood. Right? So just because your brain can think of it doesn't mean you get to do it. Right? So if enslaving, you should work on that. Get some counseling. Talk about it. And lastly, and obviously, hopefully, it's unifying, right? Meaning this, that we both want to do it. We're generally feeling good about this, right? It's not some weird thing that we're uncomfortable with, and we both enjoy it. Right? Now, I want to say this very clearly, is that doesn't mean, pleasure is equally distributed at all times. It just means we both enjoy this moment, right? Because I don't know if you've figured this out in Song of Songs yet. That was close. That was almost a slam dunk in my coffee, right? She has just danced for him, which obviously he's enjoying way more than she is. I'm just gonna put it out there, right? And then he's like, I wanna grab you in certain places, right? I want to explore regions of your body, right? In the non-traditional ways, right? And so obviously in those moments, right, the pleasure is unequally distributed, and that's fine. But you both have to want it and be okay with it and desire it, which means this. You need to talk about it. One of the greatest sexual tools you got is called communication, right? Hey, babe, I want to try this. Can we do that? Can we go over there? Have you thought about this? Right? That's a good thing. You should talk about it. Or like even during it, guys and ladies, like women, men need help. That does not feel good. Move over a little bit. Stop that. Like, instructions, we need them, right? Like, men try to play like we know what's going on. We have no idea, right? Like, give us something, because then what happens is you feel good. He feels like a boss. I pleasure my woman. And it's a win-win, right? It's a good time. So you got to talk about it, right? Because men are easy, right? Get naked and move towards them. You'll know what to do. That's kind of how it works. Women, a little more complex, right? We need some help. So you got to be able to talk about it, right? Tell them what's going on. And here's the thing. If you can't talk about sex in your marriage, that's a diagnosing a big issue. Why? Where's the block here? Where's the shame? Where's the fear? Maybe there is some woundedness. Maybe there's some sexual past that you've never actually worked out. What's going on? We'll figure out why we don't want to talk about this, because that is a big issue, right? So discovering that and understanding it. And if this is all the case, I meant to say this earlier, but I didn't. So if you're dating, the answer is no. Right? Like, hopefully I didn't have to say that out loud, but I figured I should just make it plain, because I was meant to earlier. And the reason is because we love people, not bodies. And so gentlemen, specifically, who often try to pressure their girlfriends into this, let me speak to you for a minute, then I'll go back to this, is if you feel like you are mature enough to be unified to her body, then you better be mature enough to be unified to her finances. Taking care of her dreams, her future, her well-being. Because apparently you love her, but yet you only want her body. How does that work out? We're about people. So if you are going to be mature enough to want to be unified with her person, then put a ring on it. Be a man, not a little boy, who treats her as a sexual object. Because she's not your spouse yet. And so if purity is the goal, what that means is I don't want to, I want to always honor people who are not my spouse in that way. So that means even if you're dating and you're in love and you're engaged, she's not your spouse, so get your hands off. Oh, because also remember how God says that the husbands who don't honor their daughters, he won't hear their prayers? How much more so for the men who abuse his daughters? Oh, but I love her. Fine, then honor her. And women, ladies, your body is not meant to be this transactional piece of power to get what you want. You are a person, a total person, right? You aren't just a body, right? And so number one, don't treat yourself like that. Number two, honor your body more than that, right? And don't be like weird about it, right? So if you're dating and you're having sex right now, today's going to be a great day to repent and stop. Because God loves you, and he actually wants to give you the best marriage possible. Back to marriage, people. Okay, the next question is this. How often should we be doing it? It being sex, sorry. How often should we be having sex, right? And you would be surprised how many times I get asked this question, all right? And it's always a fun day during marriage prep when I have to tell the boy, usually, that like 14 times a week is not going to happen. You know what I'm saying? It's like morning and night. We can pull it off. It's like, man, you've never had good sex. It takes longer than that, right? Right? It's not like the movies, right, where it's like, you know, your clothes fly off and 2 minutes later you're done, right? Well, maybe for him. But generally speaking, right, good sex takes longer than that, right? It's more than that. And in fact, you might think, well, the Bible clearly doesn't talk about this. Oh, but it does, actually, right? And here's the thing, right? The reason why we need to talk about this is because if you enter into marriage, like we talked about a couple weeks ago, man, I'm so excited right now. I'm just kidding. It's because I got to get this thing over with. So I'm going to talk fast. I literally had about 3 weeks worth of content that I tried to boil down into 1 week. So who wanted to talk about 3 weeks worth of sex? I'm just saying, I didn't think the church would like that. So I'm trying to boil that down, right? So the thing is this, right, is if you walk into a marriage, and I've seen this happen many times, right, where he thinks we're going to have sex like once a week, and she's like, I want to have it every day. That's a difference, right? Or he's like, I'm going to have sex, you know, like I said, like legitimately, like 14 times a week, and she's like, just touch me once a month. That's a big difference, right? That's a big difference of expectation. What's going to happen is that's going to cause problems. Right? So there actually has to be a communication here. What is good for our rhythm? What can we do? Barring sickness and kids, little demonic enemies of sexual pleasure, right? I love them, but like, let's be real, right? Never go to sleep on time. Anyways, right? The point being, it's got to talk about that, right? But the Bible does say in 1 Corinthians 7, right, that the only reason why a husband and wife should stop or refrain from having sex is to pray. Did you know that? To fast sex, to pray, and then come back together so the devil does not wedge a thing between you because of your lack of self-control, Paul says. Right? So here's the biblical answer, as often as you can. On average, married people, all ages, have sex about once a week. That's kind of the average. The lower you go in age, the higher that goes up, right? If you're under 30, typically studies say you're about 2-3 times a week, right? And Martin Luther is quoted as saying that 2 times a week keeps the tempter at bay. And so, you know, why not aim for 2 times a week? Why not? And you might be asking me, like, how the heck is that possible? You know how it's possible? One of the sexiest things you got is called a schedule. right? Young people don't get this, right? You got to schedule sex in, right? It's not just like this spontaneous firework crap that we think. No, you got to actually put it on the calendar. Don't put like sex on the calendar. Put like date night, right? Because that's awkward. Someone finds that. But like you actually got to schedule that stuff in, right? And it's because, right, there are kind of three different kinds of sex in a marriage. And this is usually one of the most helpful things that young people hear. And I think it's good for us today. Is there's three kinds of things, and just bear with me. They're food analogies, but it doesn't mean sex is like that, but whatever, right? First one is this, fast food sex, right? This is like, right, going to McDonald's. It's maybe tastes good, it's quick, it's exciting, it's hormones, it's pleasure. It's like, baby, come home, I got some things to do to you right now. And it happens, it's spontaneous, and it's wonderful, right? But how many of you know, right, spontaneity doesn't always work out, and you can't build a healthy body of going to McDonald's all the time, right? Right? Sure, it's exciting. Sure, it's quick and easy sometimes, it fulfills the need, but it's not life-sustaining, right? So yes, every so often you got the spontaneous firework, clothes flying off, sex, that's great, it's wonderful, but if you wait for that to always happen, you'll be waiting probably more than you think, right? The other kind of sex is gourmet sex. This is like when you go to like a gourmet meal, you know what I'm saying? You save up for a while, you spend more money than you probably should have, but it's wonderful and it's luxurious. And this looks like going away for a weekend, make sure kids are not around, right? My hotel room has a no dress code policy, like literally no dresses are allowed in the room, right? And we just spend time together. There's baths and massages and showers and like that, just us together, right? And obviously, if you try to have a gourmet meal every night, you go broke, right? Unless you're super rich, then you should be giving more to the church. But, right? The point being is you can't sustain a life of waiting for the once-a-month gourmet meal, right? Right? Same thing, you can't sustain a marriage off of that sex. It's good. Maybe you should try to have it, every 2-3 months, have a time to get alone. But like the life-sustaining sex is the home-cooked sex, the home-cooked meal, where it's familiar, right? It's regular for us. We know each other. We kind of know what works. We know how long it takes. We know what's going on. It's about sustaining life. It's the good, just everyday home cooking. And hear me today. And this might be too much information, but if we're going to do it right, it takes about an hour. With all the flirting and the foreplay and the actual stuff and then the cuddling, because cuddling matters, gentlemen, right? You don't just hit it and quit it. You got to cuddle that, right? You need to, right? You got to cuddle, right? And so it takes a good hour. So you got to schedule that because life is busy, right? Things happen, right? And so if you're going to prioritize the unity of a marriage, put it on the calendar. And if you're not having sex, right, that's a problem. You're married. It's a problem, right? Now, obviously, like I said, there's seasons, there's times, there's sickness, there's kids, there's pregnancy, sure. But generally speaking, right, you should be having sex. And if you're not, you might want to ask why. What's the woundedness there? What is going on? And then the third question is always, well, what if I'm not in the mood? And I don't really have time to deal with this one today because my time is gone. Guys, we are just having such a great sex talk. Here's the thing. I'll say this. If being not in the mood for sex is okay as long as it's not a pattern. Right? Because sex is not about you. It's about serving the spouse. And so, being tired, having the kids run on you all day, and having fine. But if all of a sudden there's a habitual pattern of you always not being in the mood, that's selfish, actually. It's selfish. Because this is about the other person, right? The best sex is selfless sex, serving them, right? So if the habitual pattern is there's 1,000 things that have to go right just for me to be in the mood, you know what that actually is? Controlling. It's manipulative, right? It's using sex as a bargaining chip and punishing your spouse. And it's not okay, right? Not being in the mood is human, right? A perpetual pattern of withdrawal is dangerous to a marriage. And if you're the one for whom no is said to, here's my advice. And I think this is good biblical advice. Don't be a suck about it. Can I just be honest? Don't get all emotionally manipulative. And in my weak times, I will say this, and I'm ashamed of it, but this is what I've done. When Emily would be like, I'm not in the mood tonight, I'd be like, fine, I'm going to go call my friend and go hang out with them. So literally distance myself from my wife and try to punish her by leaving. That's an idiot. And I have done that too many times. So don't be like Mike. Be like Mike on my good days, not my bad ones, right? Because don't do that. And some of you do that. Maybe you don't actually leave the house, but you get cold and distant, go do your own thing. And the moment she says no or he says no, it's like, no, you want to serve them, right? So if they're not in the mood, then just honor that. Cuddle them anyway, right? Because maybe your cuddling is going to get him in the mood. I'm just saying, right? I'm just putting it out there, right? Right? If it doesn't, you're not disappointed because it was a good time and you talked about it. Lastly today, my time is gone, and there's more things I wanted to deal with, but I want to deal with this last question that always comes up and just sort of end with this place, is what happens if my spouse is watching porn? Or if you're single here today or dating and you're watching porn. You know, we don't believe porn is good at all as Christians. Hopefully, at this point, given our sexual theology, that makes a lot of sense, right? But Jesus said in Matthew chapter 5 that to look at a woman with lustful intent is to commit adultery of the heart, right? What happens is when I look lustfully, purely out of lust for this person, a couple things begin to happen. Number one is I break covenant, ultimately. I'm allowing other things into my covenantal place. In fact, some people call it the harem of the mind, where I have a bunch of naked images of women in my mind I can pull up all the time, and even when you're having sex with your wife, you're thinking about that. That's adultery of the heart. It's adultery of the heart. All right? So number one is we don't want to look at people lustfully for that reason, but it's because ultimately it dehumanizes people. It objectifies women specifically. Right? It makes them objects of my pleasure and tools of my masturbation, not sexual beings, beautiful to be known and loved. When you engage in pornography, guys, it breaks your brain down. Did you know that? It rewires the chemistry of your brain. It dehumanizes women. It makes you unable to have proper expectations for sex when you're actually in marriage. It makes women have deep-seated insecurities and a lot of confusion about what men actually want and need out of sex, and so they're trying to do things that should never be done because they're trying to compete with fantasies and airbrush things. And wives, husbands, your wives cannot compete with a woman who never says no. Oh, and by the way, all the abuse tied to the industry and how it's actually linked directly to sex trafficking around the world. So if you're going to get off on abuse, you got an issue. I'm just going to put that before you. Right? Like pornography in all regards is just bad. Like guys, if Russell Brand is getting on the no porn thing, like I'm just saying, probably we should listen, right? Like it's not a great idea. It destroys marriages because it destroys covenant. And here's the thing today I want us to deal with. If you're here today and you are a spouse looking at pornography, if you're dating and you're looking at pornography, if you're single and you're looking at pornography, let me say this to you very plainly and very pastorally, hopefully, and almost like a father. Stop. No one has a gun to your head making you watch it. Only your lack of self-control. Stop abusing women. If you're a feminist in the room, you should hate pornography, by the way. It's the weirdest thing is all these feminists love pornography as sexual liberation. Yes, let's love women by making them objects of my masturbation. None of it makes sense, right? And so stop it. Grow up, love people, honor what God made in that woman, and stop using her. But with that said, I want to offer hope. Because the gospel of Jesus doesn't just crush us, it heals us. It doesn't just expose us, it actually makes us whole again. So if you're here today, I want to say two things before we're done, and we are almost done, is this. Number one, actually, Anthony, come up, play for me, so I force myself to conclude here. Number one is this, is if you are addicted to porn in the room today, which is a growing problem, right? It's running your life. It's ruining your life. Can I just ask you today, get help, please. Don't let silence keep you imprisoned. In the community of grace, there is no such thing as shame. Because we're all broken. We're all sinners. We've all done some messed up things, and yet God redeems every single one of us. So if you are addicted, not just struggling, but your life has become dependent on pornography, you need to go to rehab. You need to get help. You need to see a therapist. And we want to help you do that. But the only way that happens is if you talk about it. You get honest today. If you're here in the room today, maybe you aren't addicted, but you're struggling, I want to offer you hope as well. And here's how the hope comes. Stop being silent about it. Same thing to you. Silence will keep you in shame when it comes to sexuality always. Because it's such a vulnerable part of me that I think that like if I share this, they're going to think I'm gross and I'm going to think I'm dirty. Listen to me, right? I know the pain. I've said this to this church before. When I was about 15, I would argue on the verge of addiction. I know the feelings. I know the thoughts. I know the fear. But I also know the redemption, that God can heal you, set you free, and bring life again. And I want for you, not what I had to struggle with, trying to rewire my brain to understand sex and my wife and everything again, when you could just be free right now and begin the healing process right now. But it starts with repentance. It starts with hope. It starts coming to Jesus, trusting him with your sexuality, trusting him with your brokenness, and allowing God to actually heal the hidden, what the devil wants to call shameful parts of you, which in him are not shameful when he meets it with mercy. If you're struggling today, let today be day one where we stop. Or where we stop and get help. But it's only going to happen if you stop being silent, gentlemen and ladies. I don't know if you know this, but a third of porn watchers are women now. So I know it's in the room. So I want to end with this. This is obviously a weird point to end a service because, we're about to go have coffee and high five one another. It's like, this is now real awkward. But I do want to create a moment of healing. Just a quick prayer. And I want to offer some advice quickly. If your spouse today, you probably need to have a conversation about sex with your wife or your husband. And it might not be easy. You might need to repent of some things. Bring some things out into the open. So for the one who is repenting today, I pray for your humility. And for the one being confessed to today, especially wives, can I pray for your grace to go high? How much shame your husband already lives with in his head. He needs a gracious reception from the woman who committed to love him, not just on his best days, but his worst ones. That's what covenant is. I take you at your best and your worst. And for all the pain, because yes, there's going to be women. And for all the restoration that will need to happen, because gentlemen, it will need to happen. Forgiveness does not mean we just go back to square one. We're going to talk about that next week, in fact. But there has to be some conversations today. If you're single, today is a day where I pray you will leave here repented, full of mercy, and full of grace. And I want to say this last thing. If you're here today and you've never followed Jesus, can I invite you to trust him? I know sexuality is a weird conversation and culture in the church, but any brokenness you may carry, any shame you may have, any guilt that is in your heart, any memories that go on, all that can be both forgiven and healed if you will trust the healer God, who died on the cross 2,000 years ago to take away sin and shame and give you life to the full. If you would follow him and trust him, he will make you whole again. So it means to be a Christian. I just trust him, and I follow him, and I give him my life. Would you stand with me? I'm going to pray as we end.